I'm Justin Snyder.
And I'm Stephanie Greenwood Snyder.
We're just an average, everyday couple.
But over the years, we've seen the incredible importance of building community together.
We'll be talking with friends and experts about their stories and experiences to help us learn and grow.
We don't want to just survive through life.
We want to intentionally thrive.
This is The Intentional Thriver.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Intentional Thriver podcast, the podcast where we ask the question, am I thriving or am I surviving in my life? It's good to be back. It's good to have all of our listeners back as well,
Hi, Mom.
who made that their New Year's resolution to come back and listen to Season 2 of the Intentional Thriver. I know that was high on people's list. Okay, guys, no more waste of time. We are going to talk to a real doctor.
Yeah.
Like not one of those fake doctors that we've had on in the past, all those quacks, like an actual real doctor today. No.
We've loved all
this
our
is
past.
this is our first
I know.
like
this is
doctor.
An honor.
No, it is
Yeah.
it is an honor. We are here to welcome Dr. Matt Turvey.
Yes,
Dr.
welcome.
Turvey, how are you?
I am good. It's good to be here with you guys. The first doctor. I'm wow.
Well, you know, this is like, I'm sure the highlight of your career, getting to come on
It is.
this podcast.
It's all downhill from here. It's all downhill.
Oh, no.
No. It's fantastic. And for those who know the show, we always like to start off by saying something we appreciate and admire about our guests. So Matt and I haven't known each other that long. We worked on a Chick-fil-A project not a few months ago. Man, we hit like what, 6 cities
Wow.
where we were
Yep.
traveling
It was a
together.
whirlwind.
Anyway, but it was a really cool project, and one of the big, and it was kind of your baby, like one of your brain children projects.
Wow.
And it was all revolving around mental health, mental wellness, things like that, which is something that is very important to
Yes.
Stephanie and ourselves in our journey. And one thing that just as, you know, you were doing these interviews and talking to these guys that just kept coming out is like, man, Matt is just such an incredibly intelligent person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you are so well versed in the science and the understanding and the nerdyisms of all of it. But I think you do a really, really good job of balancing that with being very down to earth, very approachable, that like you're able to break it down for people like me at my level. So way, way, way down there. So even myself and my wife, you know, you can talk to both of us because she's obviously much smarter than I am. So no, but it is a huge, huge honor to have you
Yes.
on the podcast. We are so excited.
Thank you.
Can you start by just, and I mean, we only have like an hour generally for the podcast. I know you
It's
could
hard.
probably spend
Oh, my
so much
word.
time on this first question about sharing a little bit about your background, because you have done it all and are still doing it all. My goodness, you have been all around the world. Well, yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder, but
Yeah. Tell us.
yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Dude, I've had so many fun jobs in my life. If you wanted a real history of my jobs, we'd start back with Little Caesars, and I worked there when I was 15. And anyway, I've done a lot of pizza jobs over my life, but really probably what pertains to this is my role as a psychologist. I've been a psychologist for about 20 years. I got licensed when I lived in Missouri, went to a little grad school in Southwest Missouri, finished up in 2002, 2003, specialized in marriage and family therapy. So I just thought I used to think like actually I started in ministry. Ministry was my undergrad, thinking I was going to go into, and be a pastor, and realized pretty quick that I was a terrible preacher, and couldn't handle all the administration that went along with running a church. I didn't care how many people per square foot you could fit in a Sunday school classroom, which were all things apparently I was supposed to learn. So I thought, you know what? I think the way I could help people is really just by working with them one-on-one or in small groups. So psychology offered that. So I changed my major from theology to psychology. Still kept some of the theology because I think it always informs what I do. But then did my undergrad in psychology, went back a few years later to do grad school at a little school in Missouri, and I got licensed as a psychologist in about 2002 or 3. So I've been doing this about 20 years now. specialization in marriage and family therapy.
Oh, cool.
So that was kind of always, I always just thought, that's all I thought counselors did was talk about your marriage. I had like really no business being a counselor or a psychologist back in those days. They always joke that people are doing psychology to fix themselves. And I thought I was the one exception to that rule. And I have learned over the years that I was not. So I've got to do a lot of work on me over the years, a lot of work on my marriage and my parenting and everything, that involves wise living, healthy, intentional, thriving living. And so I've done a lot of work, right? And I'm a big believer in this stuff. So done a lot in the area of psychology since then, but just love it. Absolutely working with people.
Wow.
And then you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you lived in South America for quite a few years, right?
Wow.
With your family.
We did. I was at an organization called Prepare and Rich first. I was in Minnesota. And that's a little, back in the day it was Scantron. So I'm old enough to remember Scantron tests.
Oh, so are we.
You know what those are?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Do they not do Scantron tests anymore?
I don't know.
Whoa.
I don't think so.
Our world is rocked.
I don't think number 2 pencils exist anymore either.
What?
So it's a rough day. Yeah, I might take it all on an iPad.
Nice.
So this Prepare and Rich is a marriage assessment that couples would take, usually pre-marriage and premarital counseling with the pastor. And so I worked with them for a few years. That job ended. And in that process, we were kind of faced, hey, what do we do? And so we always wanted to take the kids somewhere international for a while, wanted to serve, wanted to use our skills and go somewhere cool in the world. And just through a long process of events that probably is a whole podcast right there, the Lord opened up an opportunity in Lima, Peru to go serve. And I counseled missionaries. My wife's a physical therapist. She worked with young kids in children's homes and orphanages who had some pretty severe disabilities. She also homeschooled our kids down there. That was the first time she started doing that. Before that, we dropped them off at school every day. So she taught our youngest to read. We were in Peru for 2 years, and my kids swear they didn't go to school a single day in their life. That is that's a testimony actually to my wife and how fun she made school and how cool Peru is.
You guys did stuff with WindShape for many years.
So after we got back from Peru, we got back from Peru, and I had some connections with WindShape, which is the nonprofit arm of the Cathy family, who own Chick-fil-A. So a lot of local folks here in Atlanta know Chick-fil-A very well. People all over the world know Chick-fil-A, actually.
Yes.
But
Sure.
we have a ministry called the WindShape Foundation. And one of those ministries is marriage. And so I came, and for about 7 years, I ran the marriage ministry. And we had retreats and adventures around the world. We took couples like sailing and hiking the Inca Trail and the Camino de Santiago in Spain, all around these ideas of marriage enrichment with your spouse. It was so much fun. Those experiences, we trained couples how to do marriage ministry. And then we did marriage intensives for couples who were kind of in a spot that they needed a deeper dive. Sometimes couples, an intensive historically has been a 3 or 4 day experience for couples who are facing, they're facing divorce, they're facing a deep crisis. Any couple would benefit from an intensive and doing that deeper dive in their marriage. But we did that as well. And so just got to see a lot of couples blessed, draw closer to each other, closer to the Lord in that process. And it was really cool. So then after that, because WindShape's so associated with Chick-fil-A, at one point about 3.5, 4 years ago, I joined the corporate side of Chick-fil-A. And now I get to serve at Chick-fil-A, a couple of lanes there. I serve our Chick-fil-A's franchisees. Their operators their owner operators is what they're called, all over the country. I serve them when it comes to mental, emotional, relational, or spiritual health needs or challenges. I'm not their shrink. I'm not their psychologist, but I help them find resources when they're in a tough spot. And that could be for them. It could be for their employees. It could be whatever. But the world of mental health it's confusing. So if I can just be a resource and kind of a concierge for them to help them find what they need, that's what I get to do along with my small little team. And we just get to meet people where they're at, because being in business today is hard. Running a Chick-fil-A is really hard. They're crazy busy, and people are expect a lot of Chick-fil-A. There's very high standards we've set for ourselves and that the community sets for us as well. So those challenges, if I can help them stay true to their calling to serve great chicken and serve a lot of really cool people, I'll do that.
So, I mean, obviously, like mental health, like you hit the nail on the head. It's complicated. It's confusing. It's understanding like what does that mean? What is that? So there's a million different things that we could talk about that, that we will talk about more and more on other episodes of the podcast. But what we really want to focus in on about today is talking through emotions and understanding like what emotions are. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Like, some people are like, oh, you're too emotional. You're not emotional enough. You're too closed up. So understanding what those are, all sorts of things. So I guess starting off with the first question, and I don't know, it seems like a simple question, but I don't know if it actually is, talking about emotions, like what are emotions? Like what actually is that? What is going on with emotions?
Dude, I mean, that is actually a really hard question. You could answer it in a lot of ways. Honestly, at their most basic, I mean, emotions are nothing more than electrical impulses and neurochemical transmission of neurochemicals in your brain and in spinal cord and other parts of your body that are getting fired off in response to outside stimuli, outside stressors or good things or whatever. And then like the impulse happens, and then what happens, our mind starts to interpret those things as good or bad. So in some ways, like, you can't stop the emotion, the initial emotion, but then what meaning you ascribe to that that's kind of where, that's where counseling probably and like healthy living comes in, because, there's this big fancy term, emotional self-regulation. And that's where we're kind of taking the core, almost like animal type, just reaction that happens when something comes at you, your spouse comes at you, your kids come at you, something's triggered, something at work, whatever. Boom, you can't stop the emotion, but you can then start to control your reaction to that emotion. And that's emotional self-regulation. And that's kind of taking things out of what we call the limbic part of your brain, more of the prefrontal cortex. Limbic is kind of like these deeper parts where you don't control stuff consciously. Your prefrontal cortex, this kind of the smart stuff, the logical stuff, and you get to kind of modulate or moderate or influence your reaction to those emotions. So that's at its core. But how does that play out in everyday? There's so much we could talk about how that plays out in everyday life and relationships.
So when you talk about emotions, they're, like you said, outside stimuli affecting our brains, the way we're reacting. So obviously there's positive and negative emotions. How do they play a role, and what is the importance of them in our lives? How do they play in our lives day to day?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. Emotions, I think as you start to think about them, emotions are like, some people describe them as like the dashboard, lights on your dashboard in your car, right? That's a pretty common analogy. Like emotions can be like out of gas or flat tire or check your engine light. We don't typically in our dashboards in cars, you don't have like, hey, you're driving healthy or you're driving well. Although some cars have that little, you're eco-friendly, like that little green leaf in my dad's Ford Escape. So you got that, right? So that's kind of what emotions are. They're just ways that we tell ourselves, kind of our conscious, higher thinking self, okay, here's what's going on. Emotions are also, I heard somebody say this one time. So emotions are like a toddler in a car on a long road trip. You're not going to give the wheel of your car to that toddler, but you also can't put them in the trunk. So that's kind of this idea, like they're there, you can't stick them back there and ignore them, but you also shouldn't give them the wheel, because both are going to be pretty bad results in the end. So you got to be aware.
Man, you are speaking our language. That resonates. We just literally got back from a flight way too late at night with a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And there were times where...
the plane didn't have a trunk.
We didn't put them in the trunk. No, that's not.
And
even...
we flew. What was it? Frontier.
Yeah.
So we couldn't put them in the overhead because we
Right.
didn't pay for the carry-on.
Right.
So,
Oh,
But
you know.
the nice part about Frontier is everybody's already ticked off. So what's another screaming 1-year-old, you know?
Yeah,
So
it just, it just adds to the mix.
no. Anyway.
everybody starts mad. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely. No, I love that. So yeah, it does definitely. I never thought of it as a dashboard before of like looking in. And I feel like I can just so see that in our own lives. Like
Yeah.
Justin's had kind of a tough year with, you know, the industry
Yeah,
and with the
the
strikes and
strikes.
stuff. But as things are coming back online, I told him his aura, I know it says so scientific, but your aura feels like more lighter and more it's glowing more and like things like that. So I think that you're right. It's just such a peek into behind the scenes of what's going on internally.
That's so interesting, like seeing that as the warning lights. And it's I don't know, I'm processing through and thinking through this now, like as you've said this about our emotions in and of themselves are moral. Like, you know, we say good and bad emotions, but are, like you said, are they just like the little warning flags that are going up? It's like
It's a good question.
I'm feeling angry. Okay.
Yeah, emotions aren't good or bad. They just are, right? Like it's just what they are. And they're very present. They're very like, boom, here it is. But you do have a choice in how you respond to them and how then you want to act in response to that stuff. I think there's a lot of research and people talk about meaning making or like making meaning out of kind of what our experience is. Because I think we like people usually talk about bad emotions or what we call negative emotions, things like I don't want to deal with this or this is really hard or things like that. Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, he was an Auschwitz survivor, concentration camp survivor, World War II, came out of that. And he was a psychiatrist at the time. So he lived because he helped people, but he also saw some people, obviously a lot of people die. Some people made it. And he said, what's the difference? And kind of what he saw was that when we're able to ascribe meaning to suffering, it ceases to be suffering. Wow. And so usually people, when they say, we're talking about emotions, they kind of want to get over the negative ones, right? They're not so worried about the good ones. Like the good ones, like, woohoo, I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm joyful, things like that. But it's the negative ones we try to avoid. But honestly, in some of those negative ones, if we can figure out how to control or regulate our response to them and find meaning in what just happened, we have a much deeper experience of life, I think. There was what was his name? He was a 2nd century Christian saint, Saint Irenaeus. I may be saying that wrong, but Saint Irenaeus said, the glory of God is man fully alive.
Wow.
And for me in my life, I've taken that to mean, like I grew up in a family where we didn't do emotions, right? Like, so that's probably why I'm a shrink, right? Because I was so like, I felt sadness, like, ooh, what is this thing you're talking of? I was forced to be happy all the time for the most part. But when I felt sadness, it was like, wow, that's really interesting. I want to wallow in that sadness. I want to experience what that is. And I think for all of us, we probably have one emotion or another, or kind of one side or the other that feels kind of normal to us, but that other side maybe feel foreign, you know? And I think this quote, the glory of God is man fully alive, has given me freedom to say, I can glorify God. I can live well, whether I'm really ecstatic or whether I'm kind of feeling sad. In both of those, I can find meaning in that and find a good response for healthy and wise living that comes out of the awareness of the emotion that I have. They're information.
How being raised, because we were raised similarly, right? Like you put on a happy face, you suck it up. I think my family felt emotions more than yours, Justin, but yeah.
Emotions?
Exactly. What are
these things?
Emotions.
But how are you with your children helping them experience the range of emotion? Good. And yet there is a time to teach them the reaction to it.
It's like the modeling, but it can't all just be modeling. It has to be teaching paired with the modeling, you know? Yeah.
And I know this could be a whole nother podcast, this one question, exactly. But like, what are some of your tips, especially think of like the kind of younger, when they were maybe a little younger, what were some things that you used to help them express all the emotions and be okay with all the emotions and yet still have control and thought.
And knowing that their brains are still developing. Yeah.
I did not do well at it, honestly, when they were littler. Like I don't know that I even had this idea. Like I had 2 kids when I entered grad school. Third one came along a couple years later. Then we adopted our 4th from China about 8 years later. I think, I wasn't good at it. I wasn't good at it with my wife. I wasn't good at it with myself. I wasn't good at it with my kids necessarily. So I've spent a lot of time apologizing lately, now that I've kind of come into this new awareness of just being able to kind of say, hey, it's just an emotion. Like it's anger, it's fear, it's sadness, it's joy. That doesn't mean anything about the real world. Case in point, a little bit ago, actually not a little, like last week, right? My wife and we've been like ships passing the night lately. We're both in the stage where, and the 3 of our kids drive. One doesn't even live at home anymore.
Oh, wow.
So we got stuff going on all the time, right? And so we've kind of been passing and not having the conversation we probably need to, and we could just happen naturally back in the day. And I thought, man, I'm frustrated with that. I said, frustrated. We must have a bad marriage. And I actually stopped myself and I thought, that's stinking thinking, as they say in psychology. I'm frustrated, but that doesn't mean I have a bad marriage.
Yeah.
I'm just frustrated. Okay, what do I do with that? I have a choice to be grateful for all the great things and just the amazing woman my wife is, or I can maybe change my perspective and change my behavior to say, okay, I'm frustrated. What do I do about it? I'm just going to be frustrated. I'm going to use that emotion as a warning light, as a dashboard light, and say, I'm going to change behavior. And that's what I did. And for me, honestly, that one was just, I take note cards sometimes and I write down what I'm grateful for. And it kind of gets out of my head and onto paper. And I'm grateful for that. Oh yeah, I like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. And you kind of just get this, I start seeing the good instead of the bad. So with the kids, I don't know that I was the best at it. I think I've got, I've got a lot better over age, over time. And the kids, my kids, dude, I love my kids and I like my kids. We've had good conversations. We have deep conversations about feelings sometimes, and they're all, they're just turning out to be what I would consider emotionally mature kids. And there's I'm a counselor. Counselors are weird. And so there's some weird little things they do that, when I compliment them, they have to say, thank you, I received that, as opposed to being all, nah, don't do that. Like when you complimented me at the beginning, I almost said, thank you, I received that, because that's what I trained them to do.
Good.
That's cool.
But I do my best.
I love that. I just heard that recently, that you should train your kids to do that. Our 4-year-old right now, if you tell her she's beautiful, she's like, "Aw, thanks, I know." So we have a couple of years, I think, before the.
But I think that's so powerful.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's so powerful what you were saying about like having the ability to like apologize to and
huge.
That's something that we've talked about a lot, that we're already saving for our children's therapy. We know it's coming. It's like it's not that they're going to have no baggage, because we're absolutely going to give them baggage. It's just we want to give them the least amount of baggage as well as equip them as much as we can so that they have the tools to be able to work through their own stuff, their own things. How much does like past experiences play into emotions, triggers, feeling a certain way? Like someone says something to you, it makes you angry, and it's, the person right next to you could hear the same person could say the exact same thing to them, and it's like, okay, whatever. But for you, it just like, whoa, it hits you super hard. And it's like, man, why am I feeling that way? Again, how much does like past experiences, subconscious, all that stuff play into emotions and how we're triggered in our responses?
Okay, tell me to shut up on this when you've had enough. But like, here's the deal: if it's hysterical, like a hysterical response is like, wow, out of whack with kind of what just happened. Like something little happens, but somebody responds really big. That's what I call hysterical, right? If it's hysterical, it's historical.
Ooh.
I know it's a counseling cliche. So I'll put $1 in the counseling cliche jar.
There we go.
But like, it's so true. And so if you see that, it's like, okay, something is being I'm going to call it activated. Triggered is way overused these days, but something's activated because experiences that are tough, that are emotionally charged, typically are emotionally charged. We remember those things better because memory is actually attached to the intensity of emotion of the experience. Okay, so you remember stuff that you remember things that are unfinished. You remember things that are emotionally charged, whether good or bad. Sadly, that with things that are negatively emotionally charged tend to be what we would call these days traumatic, and trauma is really just the lack of care. It doesn't mean physical abuse, sexual abuse necessarily, obviously does, but it doesn't have to be that. Trauma was minor trauma was, me trying to get straight A's, and I got a B+ on a spelling test. My mom said, "Oh, you can do better next time." Well, I said for that B+. Like I was proud of that B+, and she said, "Oh, you'll do better next time." Dude, the intent of that little comment was very different than the impact of that comment in my heart, my life. I remember that was like third grade, man. I'm almost 50, and I still remember that. Obviously, I've worked it out. we're good there.
We'll work it out now.
That's actually why we're on the call right now. It's to...
This is an intervention.
Exactly.
So we yes, when stuff is activated, it is almost always going back to a previous experience, whether you're really aware of that or not. And that's where the importance of kind of going back and unpacking all the stuff that we've got in our childhood and formative years early on. It's important, and that's why psychologists do it so much, is because back then, you don't have words to put to the trauma or the emotions that you experienced. And so your brain is trying to close the loop on an experience that didn't make any sense to it. But if it can never put a logical and reasonable kind of bow or ending of the story to something that happened back in the past, it's going to continue spinning its wheels trying to solve that forever and ever and ever. And when something comes in that it reminds it of that, it's like, oh, let's go right back to this thing that happened when I was 13. Let's try to solve it. You probably ended up with some crazy story you told yourself about that experience back then. But you're doing that then as a 50-year-old. You're doing that as a 70-year-old. You're doing that as an 80-year-old. And so that's where, if we can go back and kind of, that's where processing that stuff happens. It's like you're working out old traumatic experiences, bad memories, bad emotions are like knots in your shoulder. If you don't work it out, you're going to compensate for it somehow, right? Like you might walk around like this for a while instead. But if you work out that knot, it's like, okay, now I'm clear. Now I'm flexible. Stuff like that.
Man.
Am I making
man.
So good.
I can just see Justin's head like, It's funny because you those terms,
this is why we're doing this. This is like
it's just
our
all for
free
us.
like therapy session. Every one of these episodes of the podcast is so selfish because we're like, I want to learn more about this.
Yeah.
So
No, that's so good.
amazing.
So we're totally off.
I'll send you the bill.
I really, seriously. But what about something, you say working through past hurt or past things that you don't feel have been resolved. So almost going into like the forgiveness realm, right? Of people that have wronged you or let's even give them the benefit of the doubt and said just made a mistake. What have you seen when, like, maybe you even confronted that person, they don't see it as a problem, they don't see it as they did anything wrong. How do you like end that chapter in your own life? Like, how do you come to it and say like,
ooh, that's
I
good.
want to stop bleeding out. I want to take out this knot.
How do you create your own closure?
Yeah. Does that make sense? And I mean, obviously there's situations where the person has passed away or there's but let's say they're still living and you're still interacting with them. You've even confronted them. You've even talked to them about it. They still don't see their part as problem, but you just want to let it go and get over it. But it constantly, you still have that jerk overreaction.
Or maybe like they don't see the extent of hurt or power that action or that word or whatever. Yeah. To them, it was no big deal because maybe they didn't mean it as a big deal or whatever. Yeah. But to you, it was like, whoa. Right. It's a
especially if it's a younger let's call it trauma, like your mom's reaction. Like if you went back to her and said that really hurt me and she was like, I didn't mean to at all, but you're still processing it. How do you close that chapter with something that still is a knot, but you can't get that person to close it with you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's a really hard question.
Yeah.
Because in some ways you're almost talking, you might be talking about like a sense of justice on one side. Forgiveness is part of that, but also just resolving it for yourself. And so all those things can kind of coexist at the same time. Justice, you may never be able to get. And honestly, if the more serious and significant the trauma was, it's been put on you. And I'm not saying you specifically, or maybe it was you, I don't know. But like the more significant the trauma is, honestly, the less likely that you may actually ever find justice, sadly. So that means if you can't change them, what can you change? I can change my reaction to it. So the work I do when I'm working with folks, kind of going through and trying to work through that, massage out that knot of trauma. We talk about kind of 3 steps. We do it, we undo it, we redo it. So kind of in the therapy session, we just go through and we kind of like, we go through, hey, tell me what it was. And we walk through the whole thing and what were you feeling and what were you experiencing and what was your heart rate and like, give me those emotions. We just kind of we do it like that. Then we kind of undo it, right? And we say, unpack that. What were those feelings? Is there anything you can change over there? Can you change stuff about yourself? What's interesting then in the redo it stage, we actually get to this point where we say, okay, if you had a new understanding of what kind of happened back then, that's that undoing. We do it like it's a big autopsy on kind of everything that went wrong, right? Was it your mom's fault? Was it your dad's fault? Were you at some responsibility? Was it something external? Were you too young to understand? Go through a whole lot of stuff to just help somebody actually see that situation, hopefully with eyes of compassion from their current self, looking at that younger person situation who maybe didn't have the wisdom, the emotional bandwidth, the emotional knowledge, whatever it is, who didn't have it back then, just couldn't do it. See your earlier self with a bucket load of compassion and grace. And then we go and we kind of redo it. Say, okay, now you see all that stuff. What would yourself now do back then? And like, I'm actually getting chills talking about it because I've done it in my life and I've seen people do that. And when you go back and you redo almost just in your brain, like you're not going back and confronting that person or any of that stuff. This is all just a neurochemical reaction and a soul reaction inside of you. You go back to that person and you redo that situation and you just find like this incredible healing and peace and lightness of like, oh, okay, man, I wish I would have done that. I didn't, but boy, if I could have, I would have. And it is what it is now. So I accept the past. I accept where I'm at. And I then actually what happens, your brain reprocesses it and you literally rewire like that line from bad memory to current reality. You literally can just bypass that neurochemically. And you have a new reaction to that old trauma. And it's magic to watch.
To walk them through that.
Incredible.
That's so cool.
You've probably seen a lot of suppression of feelings and a lot of just people tucking it down
right. Well, like
or
you said,
it
just keeps spinning.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, some people may not even realize that it's still spinning. And it's like, someone
coming out in other ways
has a reaction to something. And it's like, why are you so angry? And they're like, wow, what are you talking about? I'm not angry. Yeah. What are the dangers of that? What are the dangers of just, I think what a lot of people end up doing to just kind of survive. And I think this is the difference between surviving and thriving is, like you said, going through that process, the do, the undo, the redo. What are the dangers of not doing that work and just leaving those emotions and letting them sit there and kind of fester and stay suppressed and things like that?
Well, first off, I want to give a lot of grace and compassion to people who are in that spot. That's always an option, right? Like you can always do that. And you'll probably survive. Like you probably will, because if you're here right now, you kind of have what you need to be alive right now. Sad thing is that I think you kind of leave a lot. You miss a lot, and if the glory of God is a man fully alive and that man or woman can't quite process some of that bad stuff and work through that stuff, then you're not quite as fully alive, right? You're leaving, you're missing a lot of the joy that I think you could really experience. You've probably heard about it, and there is a book that's really famous these days called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's all kind of about trauma that really has like a bodily, it almost manifests itself in certain parts of the body. Not all trauma, but certain things happen. And so like, actually a great example from a friend of mine, a buddy of mine that I did some work with back in the day. His body would like react to cold water. Like if he got in cold water, his whole body would break out in hives. And, he just never really thought about it too much. He went through a therapeutic experience at a place that does great work. And he went back and he realized that he was about 5 or 6. Mom or dad, can't remember who it was. And they were at a cold lake up north in Michigan or something. Said, hey, you need to learn to swim. He goes, I don't know. I don't really want to do that. And they chucked him in the lake. Now, the lake was 3 feet deep. He wasn't going to die. But a little 5 or 6-year-old didn't know that, didn't know how to swim. And it was incredibly traumatic for him. Literally, his body took that traumatic response and said anytime he felt cold water like that, it would just boom, it would say, no, we can't handle that. Wow. He went through therapy and he came back. He said, Turvey, he goes, I went through that whole process. We do, undo, redo all this stuff. He goes, I just took a cold shower and like nothing. He goes, my body's fine. And now that's not always the case. Sure. So please don't like think that always happens. It's kind of an extreme. But that's really what happens because that stuff gets stored somewhere inside of us until we process it and work out that emotional knot.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I've heard, growing up, what I've heard and you see, like men get put in one box and women get put in another box. And again, not to overgeneralize, but oftentimes that's kind of how it was seen and taught to us growing up. It's like women are the emotional ones, men are the logical ones. And that's just, the way it is. And that's how you work through. Like, I don't know, just in our experiences and stuff like that, I wouldn't agree with that necessarily. I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious what your insights and experiences as a qualified professional, on that idea, that observation,
Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. I think we're both emotional. I think men are probably socialized in America, at least, to maybe show less of that. But it doesn't mean we don't have emotions. It just means we've kind of been told don't show it as much. And I honestly think like when I do work with couples, a lot of times, and I serve a special population outside of Chick-fil-A. I do a lot of work with military couples, and it's kind of like some pretty rough and tough guys who are in the military, and they kind of come in, and it's like there's no emotional response, man. But like I work with them for one day and allow them and give them the freedom to kind of recognize some of those emotions and this idea if it's hysterical, it's historical, and we're talking about this stuff, and like they are in it, and their wives just look at them as like, who the heck are you? And then it almost scares the wife because she doesn't know, like, who's this guy who's talking about emotions and feelings and whatnot? It's all right there. It's just kind of like right there at the surface, tip of the tongue type thing for guys with some of those emotions. Again, got to be careful. Like, you don't want to be controlled by your emotions. Like, that's not the goal. I think some people misinterpret some therapy as like, oh, it's going to be all emotions, and now I'm just going to be willy-nilly, I'm going to be all over the board. It's not that at all. It's emotional regulation. That's wise living. That's living a flourishing life. It's fun Greek word, eudaimonia. It's like the good life is taking care of recognizing what's going on, but handling that in a wise, I would say also a godly, God-honoring way. That's where it's all at, man. And guys do a great job of that, honestly. When they're with a bunch of other guys, usually, I think sometimes in the space of a marriage, it may be that the wife may, and again, that's a stereotype, so it's not always true. I'm actually the emotional one, probably more than my wife. Dude looks like a lady in my marriage. And so it's like the marriage space only has so much kind of emotional ability to kind of pop out. And if one person's more emotional, you kind of reach this level of balance, homeostasis, where that's about enough. So sometimes she takes it all. And then you feel like, well, she's emotional enough for both of us. I'm not going to mess with it. Or he's so emotional. She says, I'm not going to mess with it. That's kind of what I see.
Then knowing all that, working through these emotions, we talked about the do, undo, redo. What are some other like helpful tactics? I think you said it, like finding balance, what are some ways to be able to kind of walk that line between I'm not letting the toddler drive the car. I'm not like completely controlled by my emotions, but at the same time, I'm not suppressing all of them, creating all these, having these knots in my shoulder that I'm not compensated, that now I'm compensating for in other ways. What are some ways that we can try to find that balance in our lives?
I would probably say, I'm probably thinking of 2, maybe 3 thoughts right now that have worked for me, have worked for other people that I know. One, I'm a big believer in note cards, literally just 3x5, 4x6 note cards, or it could be on your phone if you wanted to, something like that. But just the chance to take a note and get what is on the inside outside. Because when more often than not, like if you can see it out here on a note card, oh, I'm mad. Like then you kind of deal with like the note card that says I'm mad. Well, then it doesn't feel like it's this weird thing all inside of you. You're not quite sure what it is. Oh, like I'm mad. So what do I do with that? Right. So, I encourage that for the person probably in a relationship or if they're single folks, if they're not really good at identifying their emotions, do that. Now here's the trick. You can't always, for some people, it's hard to identify what you're feeling. And that was me, right? Like I kind of grew up with like, you are happy or nothing. So it took me a while to kind of say, what am I really feeling? There's a lot of really cool apps. Soul Time is a great kind of guided meditation app that I love, but it kind of says, hey, what are you feeling right now? And it asks you to pick a few words, and you go through, you pick those few words, and then it gives you the chance to kind of just slowly try some deep breathing exercises and recognize what's going on inside of you and what do you want to do with that. So that's where I say that's what it takes, some awareness and some emotional maturity to say, okay, I know what's going on inside of me. That's only work you can do. Your spouse can't do that for you. Friends can't do that for you. Parents can't do that. You got to do it for yourself. And once you recognize what's in there, then you can get it out. And then you have the choice how to respond to that as opposed to react to it. Very different things, a response versus just a gut reaction. So that's a couple of thoughts right there. There's a lot of apps out there. You can get feeling apps and like, what am I feeling? And the pictures, or there's sheets of paper that, people put on their fridge for their kids. It's like, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm frustrated, whatever.
Yeah.
Dude, I used those when I was in grad school because I did not know what I was feeling. I had to figure it out.
Good for you.
Well, you have something called the feelings wheel, right?
Yeah.
You've talked about that before.
The feelings wheel. And it like expands, right? I used to have it right there. But yeah, it like starts with just the pretty basic, and then it goes into like, I think by the end there's like 100 different types of feelings on the outer wheel. Yeah, we could put that as a resource for this because sometimes you don't even know what all the feelings are, and it's like there's a difference between angry versus like
hangry.
Well, angry, yeah. No, but there's like different feelings that I feel like are kind of, we almost use them in a similar way. I don't know, even like maybe the English language like doesn't do a good job at making a difference between them. Like I always think of like the different love in the Bible, like agape love versus, and we just call it love, and it's similar with emotions, where when you can name it and have that power over it, I found that really helps. And
that's good. I think that's fascinating with like the note cards, and I've heard from they're like journaling, but that process of taking what's on the inside and turning it into a tangible action of speaking it, writing it, doing something where you're activating and using a different part of your brain to express it, to get it out, as opposed to it just sitting there, rent free in your mind and in your body and causing those kinds of issues, you know?
Yeah. I did an exercise a long time ago, and it's something I sometimes ask couples I work with to do. I kind of call it milestones and messages. And I went through my life and basically every year as early as I can remember. And I tried to remember like one big milestone in every given year or grade or whatever, basically 0 to 25. And I got that memory. I spent some time thinking about it, getting quiet, getting, a quiet place where I could think and just reflect. Wrote down one of those things on a note card. Again, I use note cards. So on one side of the note card, I wrote down kind of that big moment. What was that? Could be positive, could be negative. Then on the back, I kind of wrote the message that I told myself about that. Either the message or what I felt. It could be either. I use messages for that. And I went through them. And you start to see a theme in your life, right? What was interesting, I took some of those note cards in and I said, you know what? I wonder if my memory of this stuff was accurate. So fortunately, I did this when both my parents were alive. And I went to my folks. I said, can I talk to you guys about some stuff? They were a little bit scared because they didn't know what it was going to be like. But I just said, I remember when I was 3 and I was left home alone and I thought you guys had left me. What happened? What was that about? Like, I was so scared and I felt like you didn't care about me. And my dad he almost cried. He goes, oh, son, I went down to Quick Trip for 5 minutes to pick up a coffee and a newspaper. And those are the longest 5 minutes of my life, right? To him, it was no big deal. But when he heard that, he goes, I'm so sorry. And I still remember it, like in that moment, just in that interaction, we did, undid, redid just like that. And that whole situation was rewired in my brain. So if you have the chance to do it with people who are still living with a attitude of humility and curiosity, not vindictiveness or like, I remember when you did this to me because you were a jerk. Stronger language. We're not going there, but like, just help me understand, what was that like for you? Because here's what it was like for me. And I'm just trying to go back and see, was that accurate? And you might learn a lot about yourself and might find a lot of healing in that, honestly. And it's something that's cheaper than a therapist.
Yeah. No, it's so true.
That's the goal.
The cheaper than a therapist.
Cheaper than a therapist.
Shorter leading a therapist for shorter.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think that's such a good point, you know, and I hope my kids would do that with us,
and give them license to do that and give them an open door to say, hey, we are going to make mistakes. We're sorry. We do want to take responsibility for it. But like you said, having a spirit of humility and curiosity, I think again, from both sides of the street, giving license and invitation to being able to say, hey, we want you to come and talk to us about that, as hard as that may be. But if it results in healing and working through some of that baggage, then it's well worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been really cool to see our 4-year-old, she just turned 4, start processing emotions. And we've always tried to identify little ones. Oh, you're angry right now. And it's almost like reparenting us, right? Like, oh, if you're feeling it, we're probably feeling it too. You're frustrated right now. Well, so is mommy. But the other day she came to me and said that a girl pushed her at her little, 3-hour morning class. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. What'd you do? Oh, I told my teacher. She said, just leave her alone. All this stuff. 3 days later, I kid you not, we were just doing something. And all of a sudden she goes, oh, so-and-so was sad. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah. And I wanted to help her. And she didn't want me to, so she pushed me. And all of a sudden, all these things started clicking for her 3 days later. And I was like, oh, so you were probably, getting in her space, and we talked through it. And it was just so beautiful to see that she came back to process it and to think through. And so we talked about what to do next time. And then of course she goes, Mommy, I'm sad. I need my space, and walks away. And I'm like, okay, well, that conversation's done. But it's been almost healing for us, right? Yeah. With especially her to talk through emotions and to connect with them on that level. Because I feel like we're at the same level as her in some of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think there's so many emotionally, stunted 4-year-olds who are actually 50 and 60, who have never been able to
identify,
work through and process through. And so it unfortunately comes out in so many other ways against so many other people.
Yeah, as there's research that shows people who've kind of been really hurt at a point, they kind of stay at that point. It's almost like emotional development can kind of stop at that point, and we got to go back and work from that. And that's not always the case, so I don't want to put on everybody. And I do think we got to be careful in this day and age, because I think we are talking about emotions a lot, and sometimes the knee-jerk reaction for parents who didn't have a lot of that growing up is to make sure their kids know all about their emotions. And again, you don't want the emotions to drive. They're not driving the car, right? Like they shouldn't be driving the car. It's like, what are you going to do with that? So recognize it. What are you going to do with that? And then the lesson, I think, comes in. It comes in that pause between what's something, boom, what just happened. How do you make meaning of that? How do you respond to that? And that's where we kind of say, this is how we show up in love, in compassion, in wisdom, things like that.
That's amazing.
That's a good point. Yeah. And we don't want to overcorrect for sure with our kids. Yeah.
Yeah. The old pendulum. I mean, we see this in culture historically all the time. It's, like you said, a knee-jerk reaction to something or a mindset. And so we pendulum to one side, and then it goes too far one side, and then it pendulums back to another way. And, it's trying to find that balance, which, again, that's like our favorite word on the podcast, finding balance in life. So Matt, the last question I have, and you've honestly already talked about this quite a bit throughout, but just kind of elaborating on this idea, our podcast is called The Intentional Thriver. It's asking that question, am I surviving or thriving? What does that mean to you? What is that concept of, what does it mean to intentionally thrive in your life? What does that mean? What does that look like?
The work I do with Chick-fil-A lately has helped me kind of define what thriving is. And I do this because I'm also a nerd and I love research and academia type stuff. But Harvard has something called the Human Flourishing Program, and they define flourishing, which is kind of like thriving. I would say pretty synonymous there, with safeguarding your physical and mental health, honoring your purpose, investing in deep personal relationships, nurturing good character, and embracing life's joys. So if I went through those 5, the acronym is SHINE. That's not what Harvard said. We made that up at Chick-fil-A, so it's easier to remember. Yeah. But when all 5 of those things are kind of going well, life is good, right? So probably right now, my biggest challenge where I'm not doing so, I'm doing a really good job with physical and mental health. I got that going on. Honoring my purpose, I'm doing that really well. Investing in deep personal relationships, I told you earlier, that's where we got to work right now. We've just been too busy lately to really give our marriage, and even our kids to some degree, but we've been too busy to get to really do that well. Nurturing good character, not a problem there. And embracing life's joys. Behind me, right here, I put this in the things just so people can see. This is a Lego map, dude. This is the biggest Lego set by piece made by Legos ever. It's like 12,000 pieces. They're all little dots. But this is one of my joys. Like, one of my joys as a older man is building with Legos. I love it. They're not toys. They're a complex interlocking brick system. I just want to throw that out there. But I just love it because Legos make sense, man. End of the day, you follow the instructions and they make sense. As a psychologist, I don't have an instruction book for people or my life or everything. I mean, I've got some guidelines, but Legos, you follow it, you trust the process, and man, in the end of the day, something really beautiful comes out of it. So there's a little bit of metaphor in Legos. There's also just kind of me being a stupid little kid again, and I love it all. But that's kind of how it's one of the things I'm embracing. So I'm working on embracing life's joys, and I'm working on investing in deep personal relationships. It kind of be the things where I want to improve right now.